Now I turn to Deacon Jack Sullivan, who would like to make a comment.
Father Ford spoke of the natural reasoning processes by which we acquire faith and rational investigations of probabilities and possibilities. And we spoke after his talk. I had a question about illumination and the crucial part that plays in our acquisition of faith. In the context of free will, how can we have desire? How can we love without willing to do so? Which is a gift, which maybe that's part of the illumination. But I'd like Father Ford to expand on that.
During my presentation, I mentioned or compared inference to a eureka experience. And a eureka experience perhaps is one in which we have already collected all the data. And in the process of collecting data, we try to arrange it in a way that is meaningful. The eureka experience means suddenly all the pieces fit together. The example that I gave very briefly of Sherlock Holmes. Sherlock Holmes has this piece of data, that piece of data, and so on. But he is the one who puts them all together and says, there is the guilty person. Now, one of the fascinating things about reading mystery stories or about reading detective stories is that the author gives you all the pieces, but it leaves up to the reader to figure out, unless you are one of those people that go to the back of the book and find out whether the butler did it or not, before reading all the way through. Now, illumination is the insight that enables the person to see, yes, these different pieces of data all fit together and have a unity of themselves. And that points to a decision that I should make. Notice that Newman, from time to time, speaks of taking a view. And taking a view means that I go over to the window and I can see now over across the hall this portrait that is rather intriguing in green and pink and so on. None of you, except the other speakers up here, can see it. And you say, well, explain more about the picture. I say, well, come up and look through the window. See the view that I see. And consequently, then, what I am saying is that the inferential process means that the data are enlightened, the data are illumined in such a way that you say, eureka, I have found the decision that I need to make. Hope that explanation will be helpful. Okay?
Thank you.
Okay.
Alex?
I just have a follow-up to the same idea. I was wondering, it seemed like the conclusion of your paper was that faith can be reasonable, and it can be reasonable when it comes from this illative sense, and that's what makes it reasonable. Mm-hmm. But my question is, I assume that you think some acts of faith in some religious systems or whatever can be unreasonable or less reasonable than another one by comparison. Yeah. So I'm wondering if you can specify how we can tell which acts of faith come from the illative sense and are therefore reasonable, and which ones don't come from the illative sense and are therefore unreasonable.
First of all, there's no absolute way to do that. Otherwise, the will or the inference would be constrained, and consequently then there would not be freedom in the act of faith. However, I think that Newman is proposing that Christianity is the most reasonable of all faiths, of all conclusions. This does not mean that other religions might not have an appeal. They might not have a reasonableness to them. But it seems to me that that reasonableness of other religious traditions must be compared to the reasonableness of Christianity. If I can give, and I realize we're getting toward the end of the period, but let me just sketch out something, and then at our next discussion period, I'll be happy to elaborate a little bit more. What our previous discussion raised is the role of the will in regard to faith. This, as far as I can see, is a part of a missing piece in Newman's theology in the Grammar of Assent. There is not an explicit discussion of the role of the will in regard to inference. At least I would like to suggest, and I'm going to leave it as a question for reflection, hopefully not for nightmare, but of reflection over. I'd like to leave the question of the role of the will in informal inference, in illative inference. And I'd like to suggest that the role of the will is pervasive, even though Newman did not explicitly refer and categorize that. So with that, I think I'll turn it back over to the chair.
Thank you very much to the panel, and let's give them a pause, okay?